Hello and welcome to AGTP Daily, where we discuss the most important tech stories in the US and abroad. Today is Friday, the 27th of March, 2026. Let's get right into this. I want to talk about is ChatGPT already annualizing $100 million in ad sales? And then I want to do some AMA. Okay, let's get right to this. ChatGPT's ad business, for better or for worse, already seems like it's on fire. OpenAI's move into advertising now looks less like a test and more like the early formation of a real business line. And I would submit to you, a bad business line for a company that wants you to be focused when you're using their product, ChatGPT. We first spoke about this earlier this week, a company under heavy compute pressure looking for another revenue stream. And it's still true. They're still under heavy revenue pressure, particularly when their biggest competitor, Anthropic, or their most important competitor, Anthropic, is just driving real revenue growth. But the follow-up reporting makes the story actually more interesting to me. There are reports that OpenAI's US ad pilot in ChatGPT has already passed $100 million in annualized revenue within just 6 weeks of trying to get anybody involved in this business, with apparently more than 600 advertisers involved. Clearly, this is not just like a theoretical monetization path. It's already showing signs of some kind of commercial traction. And I'm just going to say right off the bat, just like I said in my original story, I just think this is a terrible idea and bad for the product. Time will tell, but I just think it's bad for the product. Anyway, the structure of this rollout is also important. OpenAI says ads are being tested in the US for logged in adult users on the free and go tiers. Again, something we mentioned a couple of days ago, not for everybody that's on the platform. Plus, pro, business, enterprise, and education accounts do not have ads, won't apparently have ads. And OpenAI also says that ads do not influence the answers ChatGPT gives. We discussed this a couple of days ago. And that conversations remain private. So conversations that you have with their chat system remain private from advertisers. But it just makes me wonder, like, if the conversations are private from advertisers, how does ad targeting work? And it has to be targeted, right? Because otherwise, if I'm not interested at all in, I don't know, pick any kind of product, pillows, couches, it doesn't matter, but I'm seeing an ad for a couch or a pillow, what value does that have for the advertiser? We're just going to have to see how this works. So this idea that like the conversations remain private, according to reports, right? I don't know. Maybe not technologically private, maybe just visually private. I don't know. We'll have to see where this goes. But clearly, OpenAI is desperately trying to separate three things: monetization, model behavior, and user trust. And look, we know that in the context of these OpenAI models and these chatbot models, and with Anthropic as well, you can be slightly worse than the answers that you get, slightly. But if I don't trust you at all, it's a nightmare. It's a complete nightmare. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. My grandfather told me when I was very young, it takes a lifetime to build trust and a picosecond to lose it. Okay, he didn't say picosecond, but he said a moment to lose it. I added the picosecond part. And I think that separation of those three things, right? The monetization, the model behavior, and the user trust, I think this is the whole story. But I think it's going to be really hard to do. And again, I'm just reiterating something that I said a couple of days ago, but now that it's actually out there and you can see that the business is actually working, maybe this hiring of, what was his name? Dave Dugan, right? From Meta actually mattered. Maybe he just made a few phone calls and got $100 million of revenue. I'd love to be that guy. I wonder what his compensation package is like. I bet there's some kind of performance bonus built in. Make $100 million bucks, get 7% of the revenue. Anyway, because the real issue here is not whether a digital product can show ads. We know it can. Of course it can. It does everywhere else on the internet to some extent. But the issue here is whether an AI assistant can do that, can show ads without changing the nature of the relationship between the user and the system. And I would submit to you that answer is no. Search engines, social networks, and video platforms are all built around attention capture. How can I keep you on YouTube forever? Why do you think the videos autoplay the next video? You didn't ask for it at all, but it says you're watching this thing. Let's go to the next thing. I'm in the paid tier for YouTube, but the mechanism itself works that way. It wants to keep you there as much as you possibly can. This is a serious attention capture, and ChatGPT is trying to do the same thing. But my point here is that, like, a conversational AI system is often used very differently than what I'll consider the rest of the social network systems and the entertainment systems on the internet. I'm not using ChatGPT and I'm not using Anthropic in 99 or some percent of the time to be entertained. I'm there to get stuff done, to learn stuff, to organize stuff, to research stuff, and I don't want to be bothered. Even if I'm using the free tier, I don't want to be bothered with ads. I just don't. Right? Because the conversational AI system is used very, very differently than an entertainment system. We ask it to compare products, explain legal concepts, summarize financial questions, think through health anxieties. Like, think about this. Let's say your mom or your dad is having some kind of health problem. And instead of going to Google, you go to ChatGPT. But let's say you can't afford the paid version. But you really want to find out, like, does my mom have pancreatic cancer? And if she does, what does it mean? What are the implications? So you're trying to do research. In the midst of that research, you get some kind of advertisement from an insurance company or from some local hospital. It's demoralizing. I think it's bad. I really think it's bad. And I think this is why this makes trust way more central. If the interface that you're using to do some serious research or to find this stuff out, if it feels even slightly distorted by the commercialism, the perceived value, right? And 9/10 of reality is perception. For sure, 90% of reality is perception. But the perceived value of the system can change very, very quickly. And then the trust part actually gets lost, or at least diminished, right? Or diluted, for sure. And what is diluted trust? Right? I always say, like, you can't be half pregnant. You can't be half trustworthy. This is what I feel like really strongly. And this is why this follow-up on this matters more to me than anything else. Because the first part of this story was, or at least when we initially announced this, right? OpenAI is going to test some ads. The second story clearly is that this test appears to be working, at least in commercial terms. We don't know what the implications are going to be yet for what the user experience is going to be like. But you know where I'm putting my money on really, really bad. Stories say that Reuters, says that around 85% of users right now are eligible to see ads, but fewer than 20% in its current configuration will see them daily. The implication here is that OpenAI still has room to expand the surface area significantly. Yay, really. Reuters also reports low ad dismissal rates, stable trust metrics. I don't know what that means. Like, it's not been out there long enough to really understand, like, whether people actually trust this or not, and improving ad relevance. Here's the thing, though, right? Let's just say a large swath of the population says, I don't mind. I see ads in Google, and I still kind of trust it. I still kind of do. But for people that are serious, the user experience, I think, is going to diminish. And in plain English, what that data is telling you, the data that we just talked about, it suggests that OpenAI believes it's found at least an early balance between monetization and user experience, or at least a balance good enough to scale. That scares me. There's also like a deeper strategic point here in my mind. And OpenAI is no longer selling, and that answer, actually, this deeper strategic point is that OpenAI is no longer just selling access to an LLM model. It's trying to build this multi-layered business around one of the most valuable interfaces in consumer technology today, and that's ChatGPT. Subscriptions are one layer. I pay for it. I'm happy to pay for it. I find it expensive, but it saves me a ton of time. Fair enough, okay? Enterprise products are another. I haven't seen internally what enterprises are paying for exactly, but I'm sure that it provides a ton of value to enterprises. The problem here, and again, we mentioned this a couple of days ago with ChatGPT and with OpenAI, is that they have to take a serious sum of money, think about it strategically, to pay private equity firms and venture capital firms to then give that money to their portfolio companies so they can get locked into using ChatGPT. You can use the API as well. And advertising now, they want to make another source of this, of their revenue. And once that happens, ChatGPT starts to look less like a pure software product and more like a platform with multiple economic engines running at once. But maybe. And you know that the ad business is going to be the one that dominates. But what does it mean to me? Because it's a very different kind of company from the one many people still imagine, the one that I imagined when they think of OpenAI. And the problem here is that if the main product itself is not the one that's driving revenue, well, then where does the investment money go internally? To building a better model, to building faster response time, to investing in more inference, to working together with NVIDIA to make better chips? Or does it go to increasing their ad revenue business? You just think about what you would do if you were inside of that OpenAI business and the ad business is exploding and the rest of your business is just kind of muddling along. You're going to make investments in the one that's exploding. And you're going to have internal arguments. Here's how those internal arguments are going to go. The ad team is going to say, yeah, look, it's great to make investment money because investment resources are limited, right? And here's what's going to happen 2 years out or 3 years out. Let's say the ad business is completely on fire and driving revenue growth. Well, then the ad team is going to have the most leverage internally. And when an investment decision internally needs to get made, the ad team is just going to sit there like a bunch of smug idiots and just go, I don't know, I think we should invest more money in the business that's making money. And that's going to draw. And then they're going to have more influence over what the results look like. They're going to have more influence over what the interface looks like. They're just going to have more influence. And I think the hiring reinforces that point. The Wall Street Journal, we talked about this, reported that OpenAI hired Dave Dugan. He's the former Meta guy, right? As a vice president, just the most senior person in their ad business. It's not the kind of hire companies make when they're casually testing an option with no intention of building it out seriously. And why would that guy, if he was senior at Meta, leave Meta, where I'm sure he was getting paid really well, to come to OpenAI if they didn't think this was going to be a massive revenue growth driver for them and a massive sphere of influence inside the company? Look, I know this. When I left company A, I'll just go right to it. When I left Goldman Sachs, okay, as an employee in the portfolio trading business to go run the portfolio trading business at UBS, I didn't even do it for money. I probably would have made more money at Goldman, but I wanted influence. I wanted to have the power to do things the way I wanted to do. And I can't believe that Dave Dugan left Meta to go to OpenAI to have less influence rather than more influence. The money always takes care of itself in the long term if you're good at your job, right? And if you're not going to be there long enough anyway to have it make a difference. Look, this is the kind of hire companies make when they believe advertising may become just a durable strategic pillar part of their business. And there are also reports that a self-serve ad platform is expected in April, right? Some kind of automated way to do this, which is another sign that the company is moving from managed experimentation towards scalable ad infrastructure. You can already see it, okay? Because you need, like, you don't just build like a simplistic system from an ad business perspective where it just like pops up or it just sits interstitially in between your search results or your chat results. So now you're committing resources, technological resources. And remember that ChatGPT or OpenAI said that they were going to go from 4,500 employees right now to 8,000 at the end of the year. What are the rest of those people going to do? I mean, some of them are going to help build out the ad business. You can already see this developing. Now, look, I know that there's a rational case for this move. I understand it. OpenAI, ChatGPT, they need more money. We talked about this at the beginning of this week. AI is expensive. Model development is expensive. Inference at scale is very expensive. Massive data centers, I don't care if they're in space or on land. Chips are expensive. And if OpenAI wants to keep a broad entry-level product available to millions of users, advertising is one obvious way to subsidize access without forcing everyone into a paid subscription. I get it. I mean, that's what Google does with Google Sheets, with Google Page, like all that kind of stuff. It's free, but the way they make money from it is through ads on the rest of their platform. And the way OpenAI explains this is that ads can help support broader access to more powerful ChatGPT features. And on paper, if you're just listening to this at the surface, it sounds like a really defensible argument. Users who don't want ads can move to paid tiers. Some people can't afford that though, right? And if you live in this sort of, I can pay for any subscription bubble, it's hard for you to understand the impact of like $20, even on a small business's P&L. And apparently users who want free access are going to have to accept this sponsored environment. Look, it's familiar, economically speaking, and it makes sense in the context of the way people look at the rest of the way they interact on the internet. Fair enough. But there's also like a more cautious interpretation here. The concern is not simply ads are bad. In some cases, ads are not that bad. I get it. I see ads in some places on the internet. I'm like, okay, maybe that's relevant to me if it makes sense. For the most part, I find it really intrusive. But again, your mileage may vary on this. But the concern is that once ads become a meaningful revenue, they create a second center of gravity inside the product. And this is what I was mentioning earlier. OpenAI says ads are not going to influence answers. But it's hard to believe that that's true. Look, it's important for them to commit to that, but over time, markets do not only respond to stated principles. I mean, Google always used to say at the beginning, like, don't be evil. I'm not saying they became evil, but the market doesn't respond to don't be evil. It responds to how much revenue growth do you have? How much revenue do you have? Right? Markets respond to incentives. And I'm not just talking about the stock market. I'm talking about any kind of market. And if product recommendations, shopping queries, travel searches, whatever it is you're doing, become commercially valuable moments, users are going to inevitably ask, I know I will, whether the line between, hey, you're just trying to help me out by giving me the best possible answer, or monetization is going to stay like as clean as you think it's going to be. I remember the early days of the Google ad business. It wasn't so bad at the beginning. Now it seems like a complete mess to me. And again, your mileage may vary, but tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. Even if OpenAI keeps that line firm, which I think is going to be super hard to do, reality, perception is 9/10 of reality, and that perception is going to be hard to change. And it really matters in this artificial intelligence world because the interface feels advisory. I don't know, something changed in search where it felt less like advisory and more just like an advertising platform. But when I go to use ChatGPT, and I think for most people it's the same thing, I'm actually trying to accomplish something. I don't want to be entertained. I don't want to be advertised to. And I think it's different in this case than seeing an ad next to a search result or before a video on YouTube. Here's the thing. In ChatGPT, and Anthropic is the same way, but apparently Anthropic's not going to do ads. I think they've announced that actually, or at least they've come out and said, like, look what's happening over there at ChatGPT. Those wise guys are doing ads. We're not going to do that. But in ChatGPT, the system speaks in like this synthesized voice. It explains stuff to you. It recommends things to you. It structures choices. Here are the 3 things you could consider when you want to do this thing in the situation that you've explained to me. But it makes the medium actually more intimate and potentially more sensitive. Again, just imagine going on a date, right? Taking your favorite partner to a date, taking your girlfriend on a date to your favorite restaurant. And in the middle, you realize, oh my God, they've lowered the prices here. It's great. I can have a better bottle of wine because they've lowered the prices. This is awesome. But now the waiter's advertising stuff to you. Now his jacket looks like the jacket of an F1 driver, where it's got mobile oil on it. It's like, you don't want this experience. No one's telling you to buy the product. No one's even talking to you. Maybe the waiter doesn't even try to sell you anything, but he's dressed like an F1 driver. That would be a yucky experience. And I feel like that's what it's going to be like. So look, users may tolerate sponsored placements around the edges of the experience, but if they begin to think that the underlying system, and this is the big problem, right, is being optimized for commercial yield rather than informational usefulness, the damage could be more important or more severe than in some older ad-supported platforms. For some reason, the user base likes this on Google. They do, but you'd hate it in Excel. But if you think about it, think about the target market for the people that are using Microsoft Excel. And I'm not saying there are ads in Excel. I haven't seen any, right? The user base is different. And when you go into Excel to actually get something done, you're trying to be serious. You want all the formulas to work. You want to make sure that the formulas are not built to give outputs and outcomes that are driven by ad revenue. That would drive you completely crazy. Tell me what the difference is in ChatGPT, because you're going to ChatGPT for the most part, I think, to get some serious answers, to make sure, and I'll put it in quotes, that the formulas are working. Is that going to happen here? I don't know. Look, there's also a competitive angle here. OpenAI is entering a field dominated by companies with deep institutional experience in digital advertising, especially the 2 that dominate the most, right? Meta. Are we really going to go there? And Google. It's one thing to have the attention of all your users, but it's another to turn that attention into a repeatable ad with credible measurement, good targeting. That's the targeting that I was talking about, right? Acceptable brand safety and sustainable advertiser ROI. Like, unless people are actually going to pay attention and act on the ads, then your return on investment is terrible. Now, look, the early numbers suggest that there's strong interest from advertisers, right? They're always looking for a different or better, I would say less cluttered surface. I mean, part of the problem with advertising on Google or even advertising inside of Amazon's e-commerce business is that there's a lot of noise. And you know that engineers always say, minimize noise, right? And maximize signals, amplify signals. That's an engineer's job at its core. The point here, though, is that if you want to build like a lasting ad platform, it's not just about the early demand. As I said, right, if there's a lot of attention somewhere, it's not going to be hard to get the first adopters in. You have to prove, though, that the format works without degrading the core product that people came for in the first place. This is my point. So the thoughtful follow-up here is this. OpenAI's advertising move is no longer merely symbolic. They're going to do this. They're going to try to do it at scale, and they're going to try to do it in all of their free tiers. It looks like it's going to be commercially real, and the company has drawn a fairly careful boundary, maybe. Ads for free and go, and none for higher tiers. Conversations kept private from advertisers, but again, how are we going to do this, right? How is that going to be possible? And they want to implore to us that these answers that you get from ChatGPT are not going to be influenced by ads, but I think the jury's out on this, in Michael Waits' humble opinion. Look, if those boundaries hold up, OpenAI may end up with a powerful new way to subsidize broad consumer access while preserving premium tiers for guys and gals that want to pay for a much cleaner experience. Look, I've said this before and I'll say it again. I pay for an ad-free experience on YouTube. And when I use somebody else's login and I see ads, I'm just like, this is a terrible experience. I was watching a video. I was trying to learn something. Let's say I used Premiere Pro and I wanted to learn how to use it. And in the middle of some guy explaining to me how to cut clips or how to optimize this or how to fix the sound or whatever it is, boom, I get an ad for what? Something that's completely irrelevant to me, right? And if those boundaries weaken from a clean experience to something worse, the cost is not just going to be in aesthetics, right? It's going to be in the user trust, and that's why this matters. Because if you can use the free tier on Anthropic without having to watch ads, what are people going to do? I think it's a rhetorical question. Okay, and the real thing here is not whether ChatGPT can carry ads. Clearly it can. To me, the real question is whether it can become an advertising company without making ChatGPT feel like an advertising product, as opposed to a product that's going to be there to help you. And it's a much harder balance to maintain, as I've said throughout this entire segment. I just think it's going to be hard to maintain. And it's going to prove to be one of the most important product governance tests in consumer AI this year, and particularly for ChatGPT. Okay, let's move to our Ask Michael Anything segment, and let's take a look at some tweets. Okay, I really like this. I was rooting around on Twitter earlier, and Kevin W. Tung says his hot take is this: the best AI companies in 2026 won't be the ones with the best models. I would actually submit to you that it's not even the ones, not even just in 2026. I think this is going to be true forever. And I think this is true actually for all technology. They'll be the ones about the best human judgment, where to deploy these models. It's the same thing, right? AI amplifies. In this case, he's 100% right. You have to think about this when you're thinking about where all this stuff is going to go. But AI amplifies decision-making. This is why I always say that like humans are going to remain to be in the loop as well. Because at the end of the day, someone's going to have to be responsible, right? Someone's going to have to be available to say, like, why did you make this decision? Why did you let this decision get made? And I remember something. I'll never forget this. When I was still in college, I was dating this girl. She was great. And we went to meet her dad. And one of the things her dad said to me, I'll never forget. You can either live life, the implication being like make decisions as you're going through life on a day-to-day basis, or let life live you. Just think about that for a second. Because that's essentially what Kevin's saying. You can just let the model tell you what to do. in all cases and just be like, sure, fine, check, check, check. I'm just going to do that, or I'm just going to believe that that's the only thing. But if it comes to making a decision and you let the AI do it, then what's your purpose? What's the point of you being there? I don't get it. And he's right. AI amplifies decision making, but it doesn't replace it. The unfair advantage still goes to the person who's actually going to make that. He calls them the builder, but I'm just going to say to the person who actually goes it. I agree with Kevin. I think this is actually really important. Okay. I don't know how to pronounce Linus's last name, but Linus, I love the work that you do. And I wanted to point this out. Revolut is becoming a really fast-moving, fast-growing company, right? I mean, you can just see it here. They just printed 1.7 billion pounds in profit, and they're still growing like a startup. Go through and do some research on most of the fintechs that you know, whether they're in Europe and the United States, particularly in the startup space, whether they're in Europe and the United States or in Asia. And he's right. Most of them have to choose. Are we growing or are we profitable? And Revolut just did both of those things together. He's right here too. Revolut itself is not a bank per se. It's a financial super app with bank economics layered on top. And I think this is one of the big benefits. And for those of you who don't pay so much attention to the fintech space, this is one of the big benefits of it. Even if you get a banking license, right? The banks themselves monetize the deposits. He makes a really good point here. So if you turn yourself into a bank, then you can start monetizing the deposits. Most of that is frankly done with lending. That's a core banking business, right? I take your deposits, I get them insured by some entity up to a certain amount, and then I take that money and I leverage it by then lending it out to somebody else at a much higher interest rate than the one that I'm paying you, right? It's just like money arbitrage. And that's fair. But Revolut, because it sits on your phone, I'm sure it sits on your desktop as well. They're not monetizing their deposits. They can, and they probably will at some level. But they're going to monetize your behavior. And I think this is a sea change in the way that financial services firms works. Think about your bank. Think about the bank that you use. I don't know. I started banking at Chase Manhattan 30 years ago, more. They never tried to monetize my behavior. They did take the money that I put in that bank and leverage it by lending it out. Fair enough. Okay. And every action that somebody takes on this platform becomes revenue. This is true for all of these sort of neobanks or neo-fintechs, let's call them. But it just turns out here, and this is, I think, the point that Linus is making, that Revolut is actually really outperforming and doing super well. And I just think his whole mentality around this and his whole thought process around this is just super interesting. Read through this, do a little bit of work on it. It'll change the way you think about fintechs. The last thing I want to talk about is Polymarket, because I think this is actually really important. And I think a lot of this is happening, I don't want to say in the shadows, but behind the scenes. Polymarket, I want to talk about this, says Anthropic data leak reveals the existence of Claude Mythos, a new AI model that reportedly presents unprecedented cybersecurity risks. The more important thing for me is we've all heard of Anthropic. You've heard of it. It's in the news all the time. You know what it does. But have we all heard of Polymarket? You need to hear about this. We'll get to the Anthropic part of this in a second, but I think it's more important, actually, at least at the beginning, to talk about what Polymarket is. It's a prediction market platform. What does that mean? So it's a platform where people say, I think thing X is going to happen, and then people can buy and sell contracts on that tied to the outcome of these real world events. Apparently somebody made a ton of money betting on the exact start date of the war in Iran. But you could literally bet on anything, right? Because it's so tied to real world events and you know whether it's happened or not. Now, it's harder to fix that stuff, but my point is that Polymarket is a platform where you can literally bet and wager on almost anything. And the price of each contract reflects what the market collectively thinks the probability of that outcome is. So it's not just like you betting on something, it would be millions of people betting on something. And this matters because it turns news, politics, and business and cultural events, even culture. You could probably bet on, I don't know, South by Southwest, something happening there, which is a little bit insane. I'm not sure why you would want to, but let's say you think some new product is going to get announced there, you can bet on that. And it turns even these cultural events into live, tradable possibilities. Personally, I think this is terrible. But you need to know that this thing exists. If you're not already familiar with Polymarket, do your own math on it. But you need to know this exists because it's important and it's starting to have a lot of influence. Okay. And what makes this Polymarket post interesting is that it points to an apparent Anthropic leak involving a previously undisclosed model called Claude Mythos. I like it, Mythos. Maybe sometimes these companies take the naming of their products a little too seriously. On its own, that would just be a rumor. But there are reports that Anthropic itself acknowledged it is now testing a new model. I mean, it's always testing some new model, right? And described it as its most capable system it has ever built so far, calling it a step change in performance, and said that it is already being trialed by early access customers. And I think the reason why people are reacting to this so strongly is that the leak is not just about a better model. It reportedly pointed to major gains in cybersecurity capability, with language suggesting that Anthropic was exercising extra caution because the model could create near-term cyber risks beyond what it had previously seen in its own testing. And that's the part that Polymarket is amplifying. And that's why this has moved beyond an ordinary product leak. You have to pay attention to this stuff, okay? But I think the more important thing here is not just the fact that Polymarket is talking about it, and not the fact that Anthropic had a data leak. We don't know if they're leaking this on purpose or not on purpose. But I think to me, the more important thing is, how does Polymarket work in a world where anything can be bet on? Okay, that's it for this week. That's it for AGTP Daily right now. Thank you again for joining us today. Give us a thumbs up on the video. Subscribe to our channel on YouTube and follow us on all of our socials, X, Instagram, LinkedIn. Let us know in the comments if there's anything you'd like us to discuss for our upcoming shows. Let us know if you have any questions you want us to answer on all of the platforms. Put comments. My name is Michael Waits. Bye for now.